Hello again. Today we're breaking from the format to discuss Orpheus, the unsung and tragically underutilized hero, and his 3-year run as part of the Gotham vigilante community. Named Gavin King, Orpheus was born and raised in Gotham City by his professional dancer mother and expat turned sports producer father. His natural talent in dance and need to frequently defend himself when out of the house led him to take up martial arts, which he took to like a fish to water. Travelling the world as part of a troupe, he was exposed to a multitude of different arts and, more formatively, brutality and injustice, poverty and oppression. Even losing several friends during this period of his life caused him to develop an intense drive to set the world right and make things better. At some point during his own efforts to gain the skills needed to play this role, he was recruited by an unnamed organisation that assisted in his efforts by providing equipment and funding. No, we never did get any details on this. Frankly, they could have just had him procure them himself and the story wouldn't change, and would probably be slightly improved. He became active 5 months before his debut in Gotham, catching a serial killer and taking down a crime lord in Washington, D.C. His true debut into comics was with the 5-part special Orpheus Rising. This comic was honestly really solid. It touched on issues of racism and corruption, abuse of power and policing, along with community engagement or lack thereof, the role gangs and their largest scale backers play in poverty-stricken communities by both exploiting problems for profit and recruitment, but often serving as the only means by which someone can survive or stay safe. It even ended up touching on Batman and other vigilantes placed in that already extremely complicated dynamic and matters of hope and representation. Now, I don't think it was perfect. Some of the language and portrayals of certain characters or subjects felt a little off-kilter, but overall I think it was a solid comic and would definitely recommend it. As is typical, when Batman encountered Orpheus, he did his usual "grrr, only I am allowed to protect Gotham, you're an amateur, blah blah blah," which Orpheus mostly seemed to just shrug off, and even Batman gave up pretty quickly, and they soon after made a solid team-up. The overarching mystery involved a cop who'd abused his power during No Man's Land but avoided any penalty. He was assassinating other police he bore a grudge against and framing local gangs to drum up support for his increasingly brutal tactics and to give more power to the police and himself specifically. His efforts nearly sparked off a gang war, led to countless other deaths, and culminated in a riot he intended to use to seize control of the GCPD. But Orpheus goaded him into revealing his plan in their duel before taking him down, and he and Batman parted on good terms. Following this, Orpheus would drift in and out of the comics, but remain an active member of the Gotham vigilante community, often being seen as less grim than many of his contemporaries. Like Oracle and the Birds of Prey, I don't see him as Bat-Clan, and frankly I think Gotham would benefit from everything not being under Bruce's shadow all the time, for multiple reasons that are probably an episode unto themselves. A good example of his role in comics was his team up with Black Canary in issue 3 of Batman Family. Yes, irony, I know. He and Black Canary faced the villain Bug and Dr. Excess that were involved with a drug mutating people into roided out monsters. Then came War Drums, which led into War Games. On one hand, I do like the portrayal of Orpheus in this, and his partnership with Onyx was great. They had an easy chemistry that even long-time team-ups often lack. Of course, the arcs themselves involve Batman compelling/convincing Orpheus to basically forgo his own goals and plans to instead turn his superhero persona into that of a villain, namely by taking over a now leaderless Hill gang as part of Bruce's doomed-to-fail crime control scheme. Aside, but 2 former vigilantes suddenly turning into criminals who also have no bodies to their names and dislike guns and drugs as gang leaders, yeah, the fact anyone bought this in-universe is impossible for me to believe. Anyway, we did get some neat details from it, like Orpheus leading the Hill gang in such a way as to reduce public harm and protecting communities, as well as stamping down on abuse of power, drugs and guns, but that's the silver lining. When War Games itself began, Orpheus and Onyx collaborated to keep the Hill gang from exacerbating the conflict and set about trying to take down and ideally consolidate the leadership of Gotham's gangs under Orpheus to stop the fighting. This came to an end when he was ambushed by Black Mask, killed, and then mutilated before having his identity stolen by the villain. Under Onyx, the Hill gang did carry the ideals of community protection forward even after their leader's fall, before essentially disappearing from the comics and Onyx herself steadily fading away too. Conclusion. It is a crying shame his character was disregarded, and so disrespectfully so at that, and the fact he's not been brought back at all is very disappointing to me. Given his relatively sparse run, I can kinda see why he didn't make as much of a splash and return as some others with decades of history did, but post-Flashpoint it would have been easy to weave him back into the universe. Heck, he and Onyx don't even have to stick around Gotham, but could honestly work really well as a sort of nomadic superheroes, dropping in and out of other people's stories and comics while having their own as well. Whatever else, I liked Orpheus. He had a great design, a winning personality, interesting motivations that extended beyond solely fighting crime and into social and political issues, and even when put in less than great stories, he was able to shine and bring something positive to them, and I hope I've been able to bring that across here. That's all for today, but if you like my work and want to help out with my bills, please hit up my Patreon or Ko-fi to see scripts, 3D art. You can even request or commission me.